Let's cross over to our correspondent who is in Bavaria, and this is Trent Murray. Trent, thanks so much. Thanks for talking to us. As it was expected, the war in Ukraine dominating the talks, how is G7 intending to support Ukraine as this war continues?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's very hard not to have to see how the situation in Ukraine is overshadowing those talks, especially as that news has been filtering through about that missile strike on a shopping centre in central Ukraine yesterday. When that news came through, it really shocked G7 leaders. In fact, they've released a statement overnight calling that attack abominable, saying indiscriminate attacks on innocent civilians constitutes a war crime. I think it was a real reality check, if you will, from the kind of picturesque setting of this summit happening in Bavaria, a reality check of just how desperate the situation still is in Ukraine. So what we are seeing is not only statements of support, but also actions on the part of G7 countries. They want to ratchet up sanctions against Russia, particularly on their defence industry. And they've also pledged to support the Ukrainian government for, quote, as long as it takes. We are expecting the United States could be preparing another military aid package in coming days, one that includes anti-aircraft missiles and protection systems for cities. So President Zelensky essentially calling for that to try and protect his cities and towns from missiles and long-range bombers from the Russian side.
Yeah. When we talk about strengthening sanctions against Russia, there are already a lot of sanctions against them. What more can be done? What will it entail?
Yeah, look, it's a very good question, and I think it's one of the ones that has been a bit elusive for G7 leaders, is just knowing which more pressure points you can push in order to try and make it harder for Moscow. The US government, for what it's worth, says in its sanctions package what it wants to do is go after Russia's defense industry, all of those companies that help manufacture weapons and arms for the Russian military. They're the ones the US government is now trying to sanction. Effectively, the rationale is, as Russia loses weapons on the battlefield, the West now wants to try and make it very difficult for them to replace them in their factories back in Russia. It's obviously a no blame, I suppose, from the Americans' perspective, but it is difficult because Russia does have a pretty self-sufficient manufacturing sector. But nevertheless, things like chips and other complicated parts for computer systems, the Americans think there's still a little bit of room there to move to make it hard for Russia to get their hands on that type of thing to replace their weapons.
Yeah. Let's talk about South Africa now, because obviously President Ramaphosa is there. He participated in some of the sessions. Perhaps you can talk us through some of the issues that were discussed and what we can expect going further in wrapping up the meeting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was speaking to a senior official in the South African delegation last night, and they said they've been pretty pleased, actually, with how the discussions went on behalf of SA. They said the president was able to put forward both South Africa's perspective and also sort of the African continent as a whole on a number of key issues. I'm told that there was a consensus and an understanding when it came to climate change goals, that any phase out of certain energy needs to be done in a slow and phased way that doesn't affect people's livelihoods. They said the president made that point pretty clear to other leaders, and they understood. I'm also told on the issue of Ukraine, the president put up a pretty strong argument that more needs to be done to try and get all of that grain that is in Ukraine out, because, many charities and governments in Africa are saying if that doesn't happen, we're going to have a real crisis on our hands, particularly in the Horn of Africa with food shortages. So those discussions are ongoing. For what it's worth, I know the president sat down for bilateral meetings with both the UK Prime Minister and the Indian Prime Minister who was there. He also had a meeting with Charles Michel of the European Union. Out of that meeting, there was a consensus and an agreement that the African Union should be allowed to join the G20 as a non-voting member in the exact same way the European Union is. Still some room to go on that, but plenty of discussions around it, and I think it's one to watch.
All right, we'll leave it there. Trent, thanks very, very much for talking to us. Trent Murray out of Bavaria. That's where the G7 meeting is currently taking place. And as you can hear, Russia, Ukraine really stealing and dominating the conversations, with the world struggling with huge prices in food and oil that we certainly are seeing going up, and gas prices as well.